He thought silence meant surrender. The day I quit, he laughed. That tight, dismissive laugh that men use when they think you'll crawl back eventually. He didn't even look up from his phone when I walked out. But when he found the letter I left on his desk, page after page of truths he'd buried under his ego, his laugh died before he could finish reading. There's a certain kind of quiet that only exists inside corporate walls. Not peace, not calm, just the sound of people swallowing words they can't afford to say. Every morning at Luminex Global, the elevators open like a mouth that never stopped chewing. Glass walls, brushed steel, motivational quotes about team synergy that felt like inside jokes no one laughed at anymore. You could smell the caffeine and desperation in the air, burnt coffee, cheap perfume, the anxiety of people pretending to love their jobs. Aya stood at her desk by 7:58 every day, precise, reliable, predictable. The kind of woman who made the office run while everyone else took credit for it. Her mug read progress over perfection. It was chipped on one edge, but she liked it that way. Imperfect things felt more honest. She wasn't born into this world of elevator pitches and power lunches. She built her way into it, one late night, one unpaid overtime, one "you're such a team player" compliment at a time. She didn't have a godfather in the industry, no Ivy League degree, no last name that opened doors. What she had was hunger. Not the flashy kind that screams, the quiet kind that survives. Her boss, Damon Price, noticed that hunger the first week she joined. He liked it, at least he thought he did. Damon was the kind of man who could turn arrogance into a brand. Perfect hair, expensive watch, too much cologne, and a smile that said, "I know something you don't." He called himself a builder of people. But everyone knew the truth. He was a builder of ladders he never let anyone else climb. For a while Aya believed in him. She thought mentorship was real, that hard work was currency, that fairness was part of the company handbook. She didn't realize that the higher you go, the more invisible integrity becomes. It started small, her ideas being summarized in meetings by him. Her reports suddenly sent from Damon's office. Her emails proofed before being forwarded to clients, with his signature. First she told herself it was fine, that maybe that's how it worked. Maybe this was the process. But over time, process started to sound a lot like theft. One night around 10:42 p.m., she was still in the office finishing a project Damon had called impossible. The floor was empty except for her reflection in the glass wall. Tired, patient, but still there. She was fixing the final slide of the merger pitch deck when Damon walked in, tie loosened, wine on his breath. He smiled like he was visiting a pet. "Still here? Damn, you really don't sleep, do you?" Aya smiled. "You said this deck had to be done before tomorrow." He leaned against the wall, hands in pockets, pretending to admire her dedication. "You know, that's what I like about you, Aya. You don't complain. You just do. The others, they want recognition. You just get it done." He walked over, looked at the screen, and she watched him change. The moment he saw the final presentation, his eyes sharpened. That kind of hunger she'd seen before, but this time it wasn't hers. "This," he said slowly, "this is the one. The pitch that'll put us on the map." He didn't say her on the map. Just us. The next day, in the boardroom full of glass and ego, he presented her work as his own. He didn't even flinch while doing it. When the client asked a technical question, Damon looked her way, and she answered effortlessly. He smiled, clapped her on the back after and said, "See? That's what a good support system looks like." Support system. Not strategist. Not lead. Support. The deal went through. The company celebrated. There was champagne, confetti, a company-wide email. Damon was named Employee of the Quarter. Aya's name was a footnote. That weekend, she didn't leave her apartment. She stared at her laptop, scrolling through old files, old decks, old emails, each one a reminder that her fingerprints were everywhere. Yet her name was nowhere. By Monday, she had convinced herself to keep going. Because that's what good people do, right? They endure. Until endurance starts to feel like surrender. 2 months later, she overheard him in the break room, laughing with another manager. "She's good," he said, "but she's not leadership material. Too quiet. People like her keep the engine running, but they don't drive it." She froze. The words didn't hurt. Not immediately. They just landed. Like a paper cut you don't notice until you see blood. That evening she stayed late again. The office was dark except for the blinking red light of the coffee machine and the pale glow of her monitor. She opened a new document, blank, white, unassuming. The cursor blinked, waiting. She typed, "To whom it may concern." Then she deleted it. Too formal. Too safe. She typed again, "Damon, I want you to read this carefully." Then stopped. Not yet. Not now. The letter wasn't ready. But she was. For the first time, she wasn't scared of what came next, only of staying the same. The next morning, the office looked exactly as it always did, cheerful on the outside, rotting on the inside. Damon strutted in late, coffee in one hand, sunglasses still on indoors. "Morning, team," he said, that salesman voice polished to a mirror shine. "Let's make some magic." When Aya passed him in the hallway, he winked. "Heard you might be applying elsewhere. Just remember, no one out there will tolerate your intensity the way I do." He walked off before she could Not broken, just quiet. That afternoon, she drafted her resignation letter. Simple. Short. No explanations, no emotions, no drama. She printed it, folded it, slipped it into an envelope. But then she sat back and looked at it again. For the first time it felt too light. Too easy. Because men like Damon don't learn from silence. They only learn when the truth makes noise. And she knew exactly how to make it. The letter she would leave behind wouldn't just say goodbye. It would say, "I saw you. I survived you. And now I'm done being small so you can feel big." That night she stayed late one last time. But this time not to work for him. To write for herself. Outside the city kept glowing, oblivious. Inside on the 24th floor, one woman began writing the truth that would end a man's career. And start her freedom. She didn't plan to make it a spectacle. She planned to leave clean, hand over projects, and disappear like a good employee who never needed applause. Then Friday happened. The week had been a slow boil. A senior VP from a partner firm was visiting, and Damon treated preparation like a sport. He paraded decks, polished his stories, rehearsed questions he'd pretend to think of on the spot. By Thursday night, Aya had finalized the risk memo the VP actually needed. The one no one reads because it lacks fireworks and includes responsibility. She sent it to Damon with the subject line, "For tomorrow. Use as reference." He responded with a thumbs up emoji. It landed like a paperweight on her patience. Friday 9:07 a.m. The glass conference room already full. Damon took the head of the table. The visitor, Alexis Reed, sat to his right, sleeves rolled up, eyes scanning faces like inventory. The team ringed the edges with laptops half open, pretending note-taking while bracing for performance. "Before we start," Damon said, arm the oxygen, "we have a little housekeeping." He smiled at the room. "Heard a rumor someone here's thinking about leaving us. Our very own quiet storm." He turned to Aya with mock sadness. "That true?" The room stiffened. Chairs clicked as people adjusted to pretend laughter. Aya kept her voice even. "I'm here to discuss the roadmap." He chuckled, shaking his head like a benevolent uncle. "Don't be shy, kiddo. You know we're family. Besides, it'd be a shame to lose you right when you're finally hitting your stride." A few titters. Old reflexes. Survival laughter. Alexis Reed's eyes flicked to Aya, then back to Damon. Aya opened her laptop. "We should start." Damon leaned back, stage ready. "Sure. But just for the record," he held up a hand like he was halting traffic, "if anyone's thinking of quitting, please do it the professional way. No drama. No LinkedIn essays. We're adults." He gave the room a sideways grin. And let's be honest, most folks who leave eventually ask to come back. The laugh that followed wasn't loud. It was sharp. A small knife tossed lazily into the center of the table to see who flinched. It didn't cut her. Clarified her. She watched Alexis watch Damon. The VP was trained to catch small truths in big rooms. She caught this one. The corner of her mouth tightened a millimeter, then resumed neutrality. Damon missed it. People like him often do. The meeting rolled forward, but something had shifted in Aya's spine. She presented her sections like a surgeon, steady, measured, precise. She never once looked at Damon when he interrupted. Alexis asked 3 hard questions. Aya answered all 3 without decorating or apologizing. Alexis took notes. Damon took credit. When it ended, people filed out with that careful energy of employees pretending to be fine. Damon slapped the table, satisfied with his own home run team. He caught Aya at the door. Don't take that earlier thing personal. I'm just keeping it light. She looked at him. You didn't keep it light. You kept me small. He blinked, surprised she'd said the quiet part. Then he smiled the way men smile when they assume history will back them up. I made you. Don't forget that. Then you should have remembered me, she said and walked out. At her desk she didn't shake. She sorted. She listed. She printed. She opened a folder called Ledger she'd been curating for months. Not a dossier, not gossip, not screenshots for revenge. A record of work, attribution, dates, outcomes with the restraint of someone who knows the difference between evidence and emotion. The retention pilot she architected, attributed in the announcement deck to executive leadership. The cost savings cross-function fix she designed with Priya, later presented by Damon to the board. Her bullets verbatim, his name on the executive summary. 3 clients who had asked for her specifically after tense calls. 3 meetings scheduled with Damon at the head, her in the corner. 7 resignations from high performers in 18 months, each exit interview labeled misalignment. Each citing the same pattern. Credit vacuumed upward, blame sprinkled sideways. HR pings. Ignored when attached to names without power, escalated when someone with a title felt uncomfortable. She created a timeline, not an indictment. She included her own mistakes, projects she'd over-engineered, meetings where she'd stayed silent too long, times she'd chosen speed over inclusion. She underlined them. This isn't a hit piece, she wrote at the top of the page. It's a mirror. At noon she scheduled a 4:30 team sync on an empty conference room, invited the 6 people who would inherit her work, Priya, Matteo, Elena, 2 analysts, 1 project coordinator who had been propping up the calendar like a scaffolder. Subject: continuity, what I wish someone had given me. No drama. Pure transition. She attached a packet, playbooks, contacts, pitfalls. If X happens, call Y. If Y doesn't pick up, here's Z. She highlighted where each of them had outperformed their job description. She labeled it plainly, credit that belongs to you. Keep it. At 12:45, she printed her formal resignation. Short, polite, clean. 2 copies, 1 for HR, 1 for Damon. She placed them side by side and felt the difference in weight between a decision and a document. At 1:05, she opened a blank file and typed a title she did not soften, The Cost of Winning Wrong. Beneath it, a subtitle, A Letter to the People Who Can Still Fix This. She decided the letter wouldn't be to Damon alone. Men like him do not cure themselves, they are cured by context. She would address it to the board committee chair, HR head, general counsel, and yes, even to Damon. She would send it at 6 p.m. when inboxes are full, reflexes low, and defense mechanisms tired. She started with the truth that had no edges. I am leaving. Then she added the truth that had been rounded too long. I am leaving because the way we are winning guarantees we will lose later, talent, trust, and eventually clients. She wrote the body like a systems engineer. Section 1, Attribution and Incentives. How the company measured value, how that measurement shaped behavior, how that behavior created risk. She didn't accuse character. She cited design. We reward volume over accuracy and forecasting, visibility over substance in execution, personality over partnership in leadership. The system pays what it praises. Section 2, Talent Drain. Names anonymized, patterns visible. 7 high performers in 18 months is a signal, not noise. She attached anonymized exit themes and paired each with a business impact. When Elena triaged the lexicon launch alone at 2 a.m., we called it grit. The next quarter she left. We called that misfit. The cause was the same. Section 3, Compliance Shadow. Not crimes. Ambiguities. We're proud we move fast. But speed without safety becomes a habit of cutting corners and calling it resourcefulness. We are one cycle away from a preventable mess. Section 4, Leadership Practices. Com-specific. Public minimization of contributors. Delegation without sponsorship. Borrowed language presented as thought leadership. She included quotes she could verify in moments she witnessed with dates. She did not color them, she placed them. Section 5, What Works? She wasn't leaving a grenade, she was leaving a map. When we measured mentorship hours, performance stabilized. When we rotated presenter credit, Client trust increased. When Damon shared stage time, his NPS improved. She made it impossible to dismiss her as angry by making it easy to act. She ended with a promise shaped like a dare. If you correct the incentives, the outcomes will correct themselves. If you don't, you will keep hiring people like me and teaching them to leave. She signed it with her full name and the names of the people whose labor had been erased, with their permission. She asked them at 2:10 p.m. one by one, face to face. I'm leaving. I'm writing a letter. I'm naming patterns, not people. I will reference where your work was repackaged. I won't include anything you don't approve. 4 said yes. 2 asked for paraphrase. 1 asked to stay out entirely. She honored all 3 choices. At 3 o'clock, she went to the small huddle room by the copy machine and called HR. I'm resigning. 2 weeks. Yes, I will document the transition. No, I don't need an exit interview on that day. She paused. And yes, I'll send a note to the right people. The HR manager, voice careful, said, Are you okay? Aya considered the question. I'm better than okay. I'm done. At 4:30, she held the continuity session. No speeches. She handed out binders and walked through landmines she'd already stepped on so they wouldn't. If you get pulled into a meeting without agenda, ask for one. If your name disappears from the deck, ask whose decision that was. If you're asked to stay late, ask what will stop breaking next week because you said yes today. She looked at each person and said exactly one sentence they needed. To the analyst who always stayed quiet, your questions are better than their answers. To the coordinator who had been afraid to call herself a project manager, you've been managing this project for 6 months. Say it out loud. To Priya, they will try to make your backbone their infrastructure. Protect it. To Matteo, the model is yours. Present it. No tears. The room hummed with the rare electricity of practical care. When it ended, Priya hugged her like a person hugging a bridge that had carried her through a storm. Text me when you're home, Priya said, half joke, half vow. I want to know you got out. At 5:12, Damon pinged her. Swing by before you go. Quick debrief for Monday. She replied, 6:10 works. It didn't. At 5:18, she slipped the simple resignation into an envelope and wrote his name on it neatly. Then she printed the letter, the long one on heavy stock. 22 pages. No italics. No bold. Just clarity. She clipped exhibits at the back, timelines, anonymized data, 3 before/after snapshots where changing incentives changed outcomes. She wrote read all of it at the top in blue ink. She addressed the cover email to the board committee chair, HR head, general counsel, CC'd Damon, BCC'd herself, scheduled send 6 p.m. At 5:27, she took the long way to his office, past the window where the city glittered like a sales deck, pretty, partial, curated. She paused, breathed, and felt her heart slow like it had finally found its natural pace. She knocked. He didn't look up. Yeah. Resignation, she said, and placed the small envelope on the corner of his desk. He smirked without checking it. Knew you'd come to your senses. He tossed it into his inbox tray like junk mail. There's another one, she said, and set the heavy envelope on his chair. He finally looked amused. What's this? A manifesto. It's a mirror, she said. Do me a favor, read it somewhere no one can hear you. Why? Afraid I'll laugh too loud. No, she said. Afraid you'll stop. He chuckled, delighted with himself. You're cute when you try lines. He slid the heavy envelope aside with 2 fingers, as if touching it might burn. I'll get to it. You will, she said and left. 6 p.m. Send. The letter flew. Servers hummed. Inboxes chimed. Somewhere on the legal floor, a paralegal paused mid-calendar entry. HR's head, in a rideshare heading home, opened her phone, frowned, and asked the driver to circle the block. The board committee chair, packing for a flight, sat back down in her office and started reading from page 1. People who had learned to skim read it slowly. People who had been trained to protect opened a new folder and named it action items. Damon opened it last. It was 6:19. He had poured himself top-shelf whiskey and sent a selfie to a private group chat. Caption VP Life, the kind of careless swagger that ages poorly. He clicked the email, saw the list of recipients, and felt the first unfamiliar tug in his stomach. He opened the PDF. He read the first paragraph, then the second, then the first page again. By page 3, the smile left his face. By page 5, the drinks. By page 7, he slouched forward. By page 10, he stood and closed his door. For the first time in months, without announcing to the floor, he was a transparent leader. He flipped to the exhibits and swallowed. Calm wrecks vanity more efficiently than rage. He tried to rehearse a counterstory. He tried to find the line he could attack. There wasn't one. She hadn't accused him of being a monster. She had accused the system of paying him to act like one. He searched for an adjective to dismiss her: emotional, naive, vindictive. She had armored the letter against all three by making it useful. It was not a scream, it was a schematic. He sent a message to Alexis Reed at 6:53, "You saw her today. Thoughts?" Alexis replied 5 minutes later, "I read her letter. My thoughts go to your culture deck next week. You present. I'll bring questions." No emoji. He sent a message to HR, "Let's discuss tomorrow." HR replied, "We meet Monday with legal and audit, 8:30. Please prepare a response with specifics." He sent a message to the group chat, "Ignore the noise." There were fewer heart reactions than usual. He tried to call Aya. She didn't pick up. He typed, "We should talk." "You're overreacting." He stared at the word, deleted it, replaced it with misreading. Deleted again. He didn't send anything. Aya walked home, not triumphant, not giddy, quiet. She made pasta and left the water on too long because her hands were shaking now, the way hands shake after a race you didn't realize you'd run. She sat on the floor with her back to the couch and texted Priya. Sent. Breathe. Priya replied immediately, "My God." Precise. "Thank you." Her phone buzzed again. "Elena, I cried on page 12. Not because it hurt. Because it named me. Mateo, I saved the exhibits. Not to use. To remember what accurate looks like. The coordinator. Project manager. Starting now." She laughed, a small tired sound that felt like a new muscle waking up. At 8:40, an email from the board chair arrived. Short. Clear. "Thank you. We will act. No promises. No theater. Enough." Sleep came like a guest who finally found the right address. She didn't dream of revenge. She dreamed of a meeting where people spoke in turn and meant it. Monday. The building wore its weekday mask. Damon arrived early for once, eyes rimmed red, posture heavy with this new thing called consequence. The 8:30 felt like a winter room. Legal asked questions in the tone of people who have forgotten how to flatter. HR asked for timelines, not feelings. Damon tried charm. It rang hollow on carpet that had been vacuumed for truth. "Let's be honest," he said. "She's talent, but she's dramatic. She writes." He said the last word like a crime. Legal tapped a page. "She also logs. Dates, deliverables, attributions. We don't litigate adjectives." HR added, "And we don't retain on denial." He shifted, offended by a universe that had stopped arranging itself around his convenience. "She could have come to me." "She did," HR said, sliding 2 printed emails across the table. Damon recognized them immediately. He had replied with a thumbs-up emoji to one and the other. The receipts hummed in the room like a low-grade alarm. By 10:10, the meeting had a list: publish a credit policy, rotate presenters by default, require agenda and follow-up attribution, track mentorship hours, audit exit themes, enforce anti-minimization guidelines in public settings. It sounded bureaucratic and therefore safe enough to attempt. It also sounded like work. Damon tried a final pivot. "She's poisoning the well." Legal didn't blink. "She's testing the water." HR closed the folder. And right now, he left the room with a headache that felt like a personality change trying to be born. He walked the floor. The floor did not rearrange itself to praise him. People said good morning without performing enthusiasm. Priya passed him without shrinking. Mateo sent a calendar invite that didn't include him, and did include a director Damon liked to control. The coordinator updated the team page and added her title. He noticed. He said nothing. He practiced. Aya returned for her 2 weeks like she'd promised, not to serve the old story but to transition clean. She declined invitations to gossip by answering with logistics. She answered questions from leadership by pointing to the map she'd left. She declined one meeting entirely because the agenda read, brainstorm recognition strategy, and she had already built one that didn't need buzzwords. On Wednesday, Alexis Reed requested a one-on-one. They met in a corner room that overlooked the river. Alexis didn't waste time. I read your letter twice. It's the only thing I've read this quarter that didn't insult my intelligence. Thank you, Aya said. I'm not here to poach you, Alexis added, and Aya almost smiled. I'm here to ask permission to quote your line, we reward visibility over substance, we get visibility without substance. Quote it, Aya said. I wrote it so I wouldn't have to say it again. Alexis studied her. What are you doing next? Resting, Aya said. Then building somewhere that doesn't demand my nervous system as collateral. If you change your mind, Alexis said, sliding a card across the table, I know 3 places. We're all tired of fixing men who think their charisma is governance. I didn't pick up the card. Email me in 3 weeks. If I still want to read your message, then we'll talk. Alexis nodded, amused and impressed in equal parts. Good boundaries, she said like a rare compliment. That afternoon at 4:05, an all-hands meeting popped onto calendars, leadership culture, updates and commitments. Damon stood on the internal stage, less glossy, more careful. He spoke slowly, avoided jokes, cited the new policy that gave credit where work was done. He announced presenter rotations. He said we often and I rarely. He didn't mention Aya by name. He didn't have to. The room understood the weather. In the back, a young analyst whispered to another, what happened? The other whispered back, a letter. The words traveled like a clean rumor, useful and unafraid. Damon ended with a line that would have thrilled him a month ago but now landed like a chore. We're building a culture of trust. The floor clapped politely. He stepped down, sweating behind his collar. He found Aya by the hallway water cooler, an accidental symmetry he wished were intentional. You could have given me a chance to fix it privately, he said, voice low. I did, she said. You liked the emoji more. He swallowed. I didn't think it was this serious. That was the problem, she said. You never do until it's public. He looked at the floor, then back up. I'm trying. I hope you do, she said, and meant it. She didn't need him ruined. She needed him useful. But I won't be here to carry it. He nodded, a small, uncelebrated act of adulthood. I'm sorry, he said, and she believed that he believed he meant it. Be sorry to them, she said, nodding toward the floor. Out loud. With receipts. Then do it again next quarter. He didn't have a script for that, so he said nothing. It was the right choice. The last Friday came. She brought donuts because endings deserve sweetness more than speeches. People gathered around her desk with paper plates and awkward gratitude. She hugged those who wanted it and waved to those who didn't. She left a plant cutting on her chair for whoever would sit there next. A small green promise that light could be found even here. On the way outdoors again. Damon's door was open. He stood inside, tie-off jacket on a hook, reading something. Not her letter, a new policy draft. He looked up. For the first time, his face showed no performance. Just work. Send me the final version, she said. I want to see if the verbs are honest. He smiled, not the old way. Softer. They will be. Then they'll need subjects, she said. People. Name them. I will, he said. She believed he might. She pushed the lobby turnstile and stepped into daylight. The city didn't cheer. Didn't need to. Her phone buzzed. Alexis had waited the agreed 3 weeks and sent a line. Not a pitch, an invitation. Coffee when you're ready. Priya sent a photo of a meeting slide with the title work by, followed by 6 names, none of them Damon's. Mateo forwarded an email from a client asking him to lead the next call. Aya turned left instead of right and walked 3 blocks without deciding where to go. Freedom felt like an unmarked street. She bought a notebook from a corner shop, the cheap kind with too much optimism in the paper. On the first page she wrote a sentence she wished someone had given her years ago. You can be necessary somewhere that doesn't need you to disappear. Behind her the building, hungry, polished, loud, kept doing what buildings do, teaching people how to breathe. Maybe now it would learn a better rhythm. Inside his office, Damon reopened the letter to a page he'd dog-eared. There is a way to win that makes losing inevitable later. He copied it into his notes app and didn't post it anywhere. He put it on the agenda for the next leadership meeting, and titled the section What We Pay For. He felt foolish for needing a letter to teach him what decent men already know. He also felt relieved because someone had finally written it down in a way that he could not charm away. He didn't laugh. Not because he had lost the ability, because the room didn't need it. Week 2 of notice is supposed to lap or a slow fade. Hers became a pressure test. Not of her endurance, that part of her had done enough, but of what the company would choose once the veneer cracked. Everyone said they wanted change. No one had yet paid for it. Monday morning arrived with that clean, lying light that offices love. Calendars filled themselves like a polite flood. On the surface, nothing had shifted. The coffee still tasted like burnt ambition. The glass still reflected people in flattering angles. The kitchen still offered fruit that looked better than it was. But under the polish, the building carried a new weight. Not dread recognition. The letter had made it impossible to pretend the air was fine. They called it a culture forum, which sounded like chairs in a circle and soft voices. It wasn't. It was a hard room with a long table and the kind of silence that has learned patience. Legal sat at one end with tabs and timers. HR took the middle with notepads and a checklist no one admitted existed. 2 board members appeared on a screen, squares of patience honed by years of asking expensive questions. Damon arrived second to last, jacket perfectly casual, like remorse had a dress code. Aya entered without hurry and took a back chair, the one near the outlet where she had once hidden tiredness behind productivity. The meeting didn't open with apologies. It opened with math. HR put up a slide with resignation dates, performance scores, exit themes. The line moved in a direction that hurt the eyes. No one said the word epidemic, but the numbers said it for them. Legal followed with a short section titled, Process Vulnerabilities. They didn't accuse, they forecasted. How fast without guardrails becomes messy. How charisma without accountability becomes risk. How reputations are fragile things to balance quarterly on. For weeks, Aya had carried the shape of the room, the postures, the deflections, the jokes that kept the temperature safe for the wrong people. Today the choreography faltered. When HR asked for attribution practices, eyes didn't automatically seek Damon. They sought the screen, the policy draft, the proof. He tried to inject ease, to return the room to a familiar rhythm. Ease sat down and refused to play. They asked her to speak. She didn't deliver a speech. She delivered chronology. Dates, decisions, their consequences, and the small quiet wins that had kept the ship upright while the deck hosted speeches. She did not name feelings until the end, not because they didn't matter, but because they matter more when they arrive last. I loved this work, she said finally, until loving it meant disappearing. No one looked out the window. They looked down at their own notes, as if the floor might hold the answer if they stared long enough. The board chair's voice came filtered through a microphone that made truth sound less theatrical. You've suggested changes we can measure. What will we lose if we don't? I didn't decorate it. You'll lose the people who make your numbers look inevitable. The line sat there like a test that couldn't be cheated on. The chair nodded once briefly, the way people nod when they decide where they're going to spend political capital. After the meeting, the room performed its usual decompression. Half-sincere jokes, laptop zipping, that tiny exhale of everyone thinking about lunch and danger at the same time. Damon approached her with a smile that looked like an apology trying to borrow confidence from last month. He didn't get a performance back. She gave him a nod and turned to Priya to go over an actual problem that would break on Friday if they didn't set it down safely now. Someone snapped a photo through the glass, 2 women writing on a whiteboard while the promoted man checked his reflection in the window. No one posted it. It didn't need the internet to become important. The building began to do something it had forgotten how to do, listen without asking the truth to make itself prettier. Managers started repeating sentences that had finally found their way into the handbook. Who did this work? Became a routine question instead of a gotcha. Who should present? Turned into practice instead of theater. Credit started sticking where it landed. Not everywhere, not always, but enough to feel the difference. The floor learned how praise felt when it wasn't a coupon for more unpaid labor. Of course, resistance arrived. It always does, but it rarely announces itself honestly. It came disguised as concern. Isn't this too much process? Won't we stifle instinct? It came wrapped in fatigue. People are tired, why add rules? It came as a shrug. This is just how the industry is. Aya let the questions exist on their own air and then answered them with what the letter had prepared. Process didn't stop instinct, it stopped theft. Rules didn't add work, they named it. The industry is a habit, not a law. By midday, Alexis Reed had turned from visitor to mirror. She asked for the hiring funnel data and got it. She asked who decided presenter rotations and learned it was nobody, which meant it had been one person all along. She suggested a small experiment. For 1 month, require the person who wrote the deck to present at least one major section. If executive presence is the excuse, train it instead of stealing around it. The idea sounded almost radical in its simplicity, which is to say it sounded like accountability. Somewhere between that meeting and lunch, the building remembered it had stairs. People took them, small rebellions against the elevator habit of pretending floors are separate planets. In stairwells, sentences became honest because sound carried differently there. 2 analysts planned a joint presentation with names on the first slide. A project manager practiced interrupting politely. Priya tore a sticky note in half and wrote the same word on both pieces, boundaries. She stuck one to her monitor and the other to her notebook. It looked like a small ceremony and it was. At her desk, Aya felt the strange, disorienting grief that arrives when the thing you fought finally starts to move without you. It wasn't possessiveness. It was history catching up with itself in a way that left her out of the photo. She let herself feel it for 4 breaths and then returned to the transition binder to add one last page. What to do when it starts working. She wrote, "Do not invent crisis to feel needed. Applaud systems that make individual heroics unnecessary. Rest like a responsibility." Word traveled quickly that afternoon. The board adopted the initial policies. Attribution index, mentorship hours tracked, presenter rotations mandatory, exit interviews conducted by a neutral third party, 360 feedback for anyone with direct reports, an end to public minimization framed as humor. HR used fewer adjectives than the team would have liked, more than legal preferred. That was fine. Policy can be plain and still be a revolution. Damon read the announcement twice. He wanted to find somewhere to hide his discomfort, but discomfort had stopped being optional. He sent a note to the team anyway. "This is the start. Hold me to it." It was not eloquent. It was finally adequate. Adequacy after a drought can feel like rain. Small scenes began to stack in corners where no one used to look. The coordinator, now listing project manager on her signature, ran a stand-up without asking permission and ended it on time. Mateo led a client call. The client didn't ask for Damon once. Elena forwarded a thank you to the entire team and kept the subject line plain. "This belongs to all of us." No exclamation points. Adults don't need glitter to feel seen. In the late afternoon, when the building gets that tired look even lights can't fix, Aya went to the storeroom where the company kept branded notebooks and a pile of forgotten swag. She pulled a small box from the bottom shelf and found the mugs they handed out after the last big win, the win that had added a stripe to Damon's email signature and taken a layer off her belief. She turned one over in her hands. The logo had already started to fade. That felt honest too. She brought the box to her desk and wrote names on sticky notes for each mug. Not ironic. Not petty. A quiet redistribution ceremony. Who actually carried that project when the deck fell apart at midnight? Who had made the spreadsheet tell the truth when it wanted to lie? Who had answered the client call when everyone else's phone somehow died? She left the box in the kitchen with the notes stuck to the handles. By 5 o'clock, every mug had found its owner. Some people took photos. No one tagged Damon. He came by, looked into the empty box, and kept walking. Progress is sometimes measured by the quiet things a man decides not to say. That night, a different message arrived in Aya's inbox. Not from Alexis, not from HR, not from anyone who could put weight on a scale. It came from an intern who had spent the summer writing meeting notes that read like battle reports. The subject line was a single word, "Thanks." The body was even smaller. "I didn't think there was a way to be here without becoming someone else. I think maybe there is." She stared at the sentences and felt both older and newer than she had that morning. The next day, the company held an all-hands Q&A. They called it open, which used to mean staged. This time there were fewer rehearsed questions and more honest ones. Anonymous submissions asked about workloads, about reliability bias, how the competent get punished with more competence until they break, about the cost of humor that only travels downward. HR answered without spin. Legal said, "We don't know yet," twice, which was more comforting than any promise could have been. Damon read a prepared statement shorter than the ones he used to love. He said, "I minimized people publicly. That wasn't culture. That was me. That was me. It won't continue." No one cheered. They didn't need to. The room used its energy for something else. Staying present long enough to make this stick. During a break, Alexis found Aya at the window where the city pretends to be destiny. They didn't exchange business cards or platitudes. They stood in a silence that wasn't loaded, just shared oxygen. Alexis finally said, "You wrote it as a mirror." Aya nodded. Didn't expect it to be a window too. The truth of that line surprised both of them with its usefulness. Mirrors change faces, windows change routes. The letter had become both. Men like Damon saw themselves and adjusted. People like Priya saw an exit that wasn't an escape. And the building, slow, institutional, allergic to quick, had opened a small pane to weather it had previously kept out. Fresh air is dangerous when you've taught yourself to live on the recycled kind. It also makes thinking possible. She walked the floor one last time that afternoon, not to memorize it, but to return it to itself. She placed a final note inside the continuity binder. When credit circulates, oxygen does too. Don't be stingy with either. She slid the binder onto the shelf and didn't straighten the spine. Perfection had never saved anyone here. In the stairwell, halfway between floors, she paused on a landing and remembered the first time she had climbed these steps to cry without becoming an office story. She stood still and let that version of herself catch up and pass through. Grief doesn't always demand tears. Sometimes it demands witness. She gave it that, then kept moving. On the ground floor, the revolving doors repeated their metal applause. Outside, the street was doing what streets do, forgetting quickly and forgiving slower. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. Behind her, a calendar invite appeared on everyone's screen for something new, attribution review, monthly. It was boring. It was boring. It was beautiful. It would keep people safe in ways fireworks never could. That evening in her apartment, she put the letter in a drawer that didn't lock. She wrote 3 lines in a cheap notebook. Don't confuse crisis with meaning. Choose rooms where correction isn't humiliation. Keep receipts of your kindness too. Then she closed the notebook and cooked a meal that would leave leftovers on purpose. Rest is a project too. It deserves wrap-up notes. On a different street, Damon sat at his dining table with his laptop open to a blank slide. He typed a title and deleted it twice. He started again, "What we pay for." He stared at the words until something in his posture softened. He added bullets he wouldn't have known how to write without the letter. Sponsorship hours counted as deliverables. Presenter rotation tracked like pipeline. Manager feedback anonymous and public in aggregate. He did not text anyone for applause. He printed the slide and taped it to his wall above the place where he kept his keys. It looked ridiculous there. Good. Some kinds of change need to feel out of place before they can become the place. Back at Luminex, the young analyst stayed late to rehearse a presentation for the next morning. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to feel her own voice before the room did. On the last slide, she added a footer she had stolen from the letter and adapted to herself. "If I do this right, you'll remember the work more than me." She smiled at the screen and decided to leave it there. Humility now was a choice, not a tax. The act didn't end with a dramatic resignation or a scandal headline. It ended with a door propped open by something as unglamorous as a policy and as profound as a promise. The building would try and fail and try again. That was okay. Trying is not a performance when you keep the lights on for it. She slept and the city slept and even the building seemed to exhale. Tomorrow would arrive as it always does, loud, late, still figuring it out. But the laugh that once curated afternoons had been replaced by something heavier and more generous, accountability that did not beg for credit, and far from the glass and badges and polite emails, somewhere between past and next, a woman whose letter had been both mirror and window woke in the dark, listened for the old noise in her chest, didn't hear it, and let the quiet mean peace instead of emptiness. Monday mornings used to sound like panic. Now they sounded like the kettle. Aya's apartment was smaller than her old office desk, but it had one thing the 24th floor never gave her: windows that opened. She liked to leave them cracked even when it rained, just to remind herself that air wasn't supposed to be filtered. The smell of coffee didn't mean survival anymore. It meant she had the time to taste it. She hadn't planned a new job yet. For the first time since she was 22, she didn't have a title. That scared her in the way freedom scares prisoners who've forgotten what keys are for. She filled the silence with walks, cooking, and the messy tenderness of doing nothing right on purpose. Her body, used to adrenaline disguised as purpose, rebelled at first, waking her at 6, heart racing for meetings that no longer existed. She wrote lists just to cross things off. Then she stopped making lists. That was progress. By week 3, the news had found her. Not the headlines, the whispers. LinkedIn posts wrapped in diplomacy, a bold letter sparking internal reflection at a leading firm. Anonymous employee reviews talking about an overdue mirror. And once a message from an old colleague, "You changed the air here. People are breathing again." She didn't reply. Some things don't need thank you notes. Instead, she opened a new document, not to expose but to remember. Working title: Notes on Survival in Beautiful Buildings. She wrote in fragments at first. Sentences that felt like muscles stretching. There's a difference between excellence and exhaustion. If you build something you can't leave, it's not a legacy, it's a cage. Respect isn't applause. It's oxygen. By the end of the week, there were 6 pages. By the end of the month, 22. She wasn't sure if it was a book, a manifesto, or therapy with better formatting. She didn't care. It was honest. Meanwhile, across the city, Luminex Global was learning what truth costs when it's no longer optional. Damon had stopped wearing his tailored armor. The cufflinks stayed home. The tie stayed in the drawer. He showed up earlier than everyone and stayed later, not to prove loyalty, but because the silence of the office after 7 p.m. was the only time the building felt capable of forgiveness. The letter had done more than embarrass him. It had rearranged his internal map. For the first time in years, he couldn't navigate by applause. He opened old decks and saw theft where he used to see polish. He reread emails he'd sent, "Let's workshop this offline, need you to tighten the narrative," and saw command instead of collaboration. He tried to fix what could be fixed. He gave credit. He invited feedback. He even apologized, once publicly, in a meeting where his voice shook enough for people to believe him. But redemption doesn't erase. It echoes. Every time someone said, "Good idea, Damon," he waited half a second before accepting it, as if checking whether it was actually his. That pause became his penance. It made meetings longer. It also made them honest. Still, the building didn't forget overnight. The younger staff called the changes Aya's reforms behind his back. The older ones called them overcorrections. He called them necessary. Sometimes quietly, sometimes out loud. He reached out to her once. Email. Plain subject line. No agenda. Just acknowledgement. He wrote, "You were right. About everything that mattered. I'm trying to be useful now. If you ever want to talk, not about the past but about what comes after, I'll listen." He hovered over send for a full minute before clicking. The message bounced. Deactivated account. He smiled, the kind of smile that belongs to someone learning a late lesson. She didn't know him closure. By spring, Aya had fallen into a rhythm. Mornings for writing, afternoons for errands, evenings for quiet experiments, volunteering at a career mentorship nonprofit, consulting for small businesses that couldn't afford thought leaders, teaching herself to breathe between sentences. It was during one of those mentorship sessions that she met Nina, a 26-year-old analyst with burnt-out eyes and a resume that read like desperation written in bullet points. Aya recognized the signs immediately: overqualified, undervalued, smiling through gaslight. They met at a cafe where ambition went to recover. Nina talked too fast, apologizing between breaths. Aya listened until the words ran out, then said softly, "You don't have to prove your worth existing here." That sentence cracked something open. The girl cried, then laughed at herself for crying. Aya smiled. "Don't worry," she said. "That's what healing sounds like." She didn't plan to mentor officially, but it kept happening. Women forwarding her number, coffee invites, long talks that ended with courage. I never asked for money. She called it community interest. Her book, still untitled, still private, grew to 50 pages. She deleted most of it and rewrote the rest. The first line stayed. "I left without a word, but words were all that ever changed anything." One evening, she received an invitation from Alexis Reed. Subject line, Panel on leadership integrity. Need your voice. Aya almost deleted it. She didn't do panels anymore, but curiosity won. She agreed on one condition: no introduction that turned her into a myth. The event was small. 15 people, one camera, and the kind of awkward sincerity that conferences can't fake. The moderator asked, "How do you reform power without burning it down?" Aya answered last. "You don't reform power," she said. "You retrain it. You make it accountable, traceable, human. You measure integrity the same way you measure profit, consistently. And you make sure the people who speak least aren't the ones who lose most." The room went quiet. Not performative quiet, the good kind, the listening kind. Afterward, a woman from the audience approached her and said, "My boss made us read your letter. It changed how he treats us." Aya smiled. Then it did its job. Later, as she left, she checked her phone. A message from an unknown number. Saw the panel. "Thank you for keeping it real. Some of us are still learning how to listen." No name. She didn't need one. Back at Luminex, Damon was indeed learning. His metrics were worse now, fewer deals closed, slower timelines, but turnover had dropped, morale had climbed, and for the first time in a decade, HR surveys came back with words like safe and respected. He found himself staying behind after meetings, not to dominate, but to clean up. He erased his own name from slides he hadn't built. He approved budget lines for mentorship programs and diversity audits he used to call fluff. Sometimes when the board praised the new culture, he almost said her name. Then he stopped. She'd written it into the walls already. In May, a courier delivered a package to his office. No return label, just a plain brown envelope. Inside, a book, self-published, matte black cover. Title: The Weight of Air. Author: Aya Rahman. He read it that night, all of it in one sitting. No bitterness, no blame. Just truth told clean. A line near the end caught him. Forgiveness isn't absolution. It's acknowledgement that you've stopped hiding behind the harm. He underlined it twice. For the first time, he felt peace that didn't pause. Summer arrived the way freedom does, slowly, then all at once. Aya's book made small ripples in circles that mattered. Leadership podcasts, HR newsletters, a few viral quotes. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Exactly how she liked it. Nina got a new job. Priya got promoted. Matteo started mentoring interns. Elena came back, this time as director, reporting to someone who understood the word credit. One day, Aya got a call she didn't expect. Luminex Global. Different voice. The new HR director. "We're hosting a workshop next month," the woman said. "On ethical leadership. Your name came up. Would you consider speaking?" Aya laughed, soft but full. "Does Damon know?" He suggested it. Silence stretched. Not tension. Just the sound of time growing distance between what was and what could be. "I'll think about it," she said. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She hung up and looked out her window at the city, still glittering, still full of buildings pretending to be invincible. She smiled, not in triumph but understanding. Sometimes, peace isn't about forgiveness. It's about proof. And she'd already written hers. 2 days later, Damon stood at the company cafe, the same one where he'd once laughed at her, the sound that started everything. Now when he laughed it was quieter. He was mentoring a new manager, a young woman with fire in her eyes and no patience for politics. She challenged him mid-sentence. He paused, then nodded. "Good point," he said. The people nearby noticed. So did he. He didn't need Aya's approval. He needed her echo, and it was everywhere. That night, he walked home instead of calling a car. The city lights flickered across puddles from an earlier rain. He passed a bookstore. He smiled, stepped inside, and bought 2 copies, one for himself, one for the intern who had just joined his team. On the way out, he opened the first page and wrote in pen, "For anyone who ever confused power with worth. Don't. DP." By autumn, Aya had found her rhythm. Consulting, mentoring, writing, teaching companies how not to repeat the mistakes she had lived through. She no longer flinched when her email pinged. She no longer counted her value in metrics someone else controlled. She started running again, early mornings by the river before the city woke. It became her meeting with herself. Each stride reminded her that forward motion doesn't need an audience. Equals one fog-heavy morning. She stopped halfway across a pedestrian bridge and looked at her reflection in the water. For years that reflection had scared her, always a little behind, always distorted by other people's currents. Now it looked steady, whole. She pulled her phone from her pocket, opened the Notes app, and added a final line to her private file, the one that started as a journal and turned into a life. You can walk away from the table and still feed yourself. She saved it, closed her phone, and smiled. The city began to wake around her, horns, buses, early commuters rehearsing apologies for being late. She just listened. That was enough. Months later, she received one last message from an old work email, forwarded from her publisher. Aya, the policies you helped inspire became case studies. We teach them in leadership seminars now. The company credited you publicly this time. Thought you'd want to know. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her silence wasn't absence anymore. It was legacy. The first time Aya heard her own words quoted by a stranger, she almost didn't recognize them. It was a Thursday morning, 6 months after The Weight of Air quietly found its audience. She was in a co-working space, a minimalist maze of laptops and small ambitions, when two people near the espresso machine started talking about leadership. One said, "You know that line? We reward visibility over substance. We get visibility without substance." That's from some book. Brilliant stuff. I didn't turn around. She just smiled into her coffee. The echo had arrived. What surprised her wasn't that people were quoting her. It was that they weren't saying her name. They were quoting the idea, not the author. And that was exactly what she'd hoped for, even if she hadn't said it out loud. Ideas she'd always believed were meant to outgrow their owners. Still, it was strange. The things she'd written in the solitude of a one-bedroom apartment now lived in corporate training slides, keynote speeches, and manager onboarding decks. The phrases were reshaped, sanitized, sometimes misused, but alive. She saw them online, dressed in graphics, shared with hashtags like #leadership, #growth, #integrity. A few were misattributed. One quote even bore the wrong name entirely. A consultant somewhere had claimed authorship. I didn't correct it. She had no interest in fighting for credit. She'd already done her time under that currency. But something else started to happen, slowly, quietly. Invitations. At first, they came from small firms, ethics workshops, HR panels, mentorship groups. Then came universities, then think tanks, then companies she used to admire from the outside. The subject lines were all the same. We'd love your perspective. Would you consider joining our conversation on modern leadership? And in the middle of those invitations was one that made her pause. Luminex's Global Annual Summit, Rebuilding Leadership from Within. Attached was a personal note from Damon. No cameras, no PR. Just people who need to understand what rebuilding actually means. I don't want to erase what happened. I want to use it. If you say no, I'll understand. Aya closed the email and walked away from her laptop. Her body reacted before her mind, a tightness in her chest, that old familiar hum of adrenaline mixed with history. She made tea, sat down, stared at the city lights from her window. Saying yes would mean stepping back into the scene of her undoing, but also the place that became her catalyst. Saying no would mean peace. Saying yes would mean growth. She didn't respond that night. Instead, she wrote in her notebook, "Some echoes deserve to meet their source again, not for closure but calibration." The next morning she sent one line back. "I'll come, but I'm not here to be your redemption story." Damon replied in under a minute. "I wouldn't dare ask for that." The summit was held in the same building, of course, the glass cathedral that had once swallowed her whole. When she walked through its revolving doors again, her reflection on the metal looked older, calmer, and free. The receptionist, new, polite, unaware of history, handed her a visitor badge. Aya smiled at the irony. She was once the name behind the systems that printed these badges. The conference room on the 24th floor looked different. Warmer lighting, softer chairs, plants, little things that made the air feel less transactional. She arrived early. When Damon walked in, he hesitated. Not the hesitation of guilt, but of humility. He looked smaller somehow, in the best way possible. They shook hands. No performance. Just two people who'd been to war in the same uniform and lived to tell different versions of it. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," he said. "I wasn't sure either." He nodded. "Thank you anyway." "Don't thank me," she said. "Thank the part of you that learned to ask." He smiled, thin but real. That part's new. The summit wasn't public. Just 30 managers and executives, men and women with power in their hands and uncertainty in their eyes. They sat in a circle, no podium, no hierarchy. I liked that. Damon introduced her simply. She helped us rediscover the difference between growth and grace. Then he sat down, not beside her, not opposite, but off to the side like a student. She began not with a speech but a story. Not hers, not directly. She spoke of a woman who once mistook loyalty for purpose, of a man who confused charm for leadership, of a building that rewarded echoes and punished honesty. Everyone knew it was her story, but she told it like parable, not accusation. And when she ended, she asked one question. What would change if you believed your silence was costing you more than your discomfort? The room stayed still. One manager finally whispered, everything. Another said, that's what we're afraid of. Aya nodded. Then start there. Fear's an honest teacher. Damon didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence he once used to control a room now worked for her. Afterward, when the session ended, he approached her quietly. Would you ever come back? He asked, almost timid. Not as an employee, she said. As a voice, maybe. A check-in, a compass. He nodded. That would mean more than any hire. Aya looked around the room one last time. The same walls that once reflected her invisibility now holding light differently. Just make sure it doesn't depend on me, she said. Make it normal. In the months that followed, her influence rippled outward. She became a ghost mentor in industry she never worked in. A software firm implemented her 3A's rule: attribution, accountability, and awareness. A marketing agency adopted her line as policy: no presentation without the author in the room. Even a government department in another country requested permission to translate her letter for leadership training. She said yes to most, no to some, and ignored the ones that turned her message into merchandise. Every time someone called her the woman who wrote the letter, she corrected them gently. Write a letter. I wrote a mirror. She still lived simply. Same apartment. Same chipped mug. Same morning walks by the river. But she felt something subtle shift inside her, a sense of gravity returning. 4 years, she'd been orbiting other people's validation. Now she was her own center again. Meanwhile, Damon continued rebuilding, not publicly, not performatively. He started mentoring 3 people a year, not for credit but for calibration. He taught them what he wished he'd learned sooner. That leadership isn't about making people follow you. It's about making sure they can walk away from you stronger than they arrived. He stopped posting success stories online. He started posting reading lists instead. And when he was offered a keynote at a major business summit, he declined, recommending Aya instead. She'll say what needs to be said, he told the organizers. I just make it sound pretty. She declined the invitation too. Some messages are better passed than repeated. A year later, the book's 2nd edition came out. This time it wasn't just her name on the cover. Underneath, in smaller text, with contributions from professionals who built better systems, she included essays from Priya, Matteo, and even Damon titled, How to Stay When You're the Problem. The launch wasn't glamorous. No stage, no confetti. Just an online discussion streamed to whoever cared enough to listen. At the end, a viewer asked her, Do you think things really change? Aya thought for a moment before answering. I think people change when the cost of pretending gets too high. The rest, policies, practices, slogans, follow slowly. But yes, it's happening. She paused. And even if it doesn't, I'll keep writing like it will. The chat flooded with silent hearts and simple thanks. She closed her laptop, leaned back and exhaled. The echo had become music now, played by others in rooms she'd never see. Weeks later, she received a small package in the mail. No sender. Just a folded piece of paper inside, handwritten in clean block letters. You once said silence has a cost. I used to be the one collecting it. Not anymore. DB. Aya folded the note and placed it in her journal, next to her first draft of the letter. No bitterness. No ache. Just symmetry. She looked out at the city, glowing as always, every light a story she'd never know. Once she thought she wanted her words to shake the world. Now she just wanted them to help someone stand a little taller inside it. She whispered to herself, half prayer, half promise, Let the echo stay, but let it change shape. The kettle whistled behind her. The air felt lighter. And somewhere in a boardroom she'd never return to, a manager she'd never meet started a meeting by asking the same question that once silenced a room. Whose work are we building on today? No one flinched. They just answered. Fame didn't arrive like a wave. Crept in like background noise. It started with a podcast. A well-meaning host who called The Weight of Air the book every company needs right now. Aya listened to the episode while folding laundry. He quoted her accurately at first, then less so. By the end, he was summarizing her manifesto as a guide to corporate empathy optimization. She turned off the phone mid-sentence. Empathy. Optimization. Two words that never belonged together. That week her inbox changed. The messages weren't from readers anymore. They were from agents, brand managers, CEOs who wanted her energy for their panels. Offers poured in with polished sincerity. We'd love to collaborate on a leadership capsule. Would you consider co-authoring a think piece with our founder? Your authenticity would add tremendous value to our campaign. She read them all, then archived them unread. Value. That word used to drive her. It made her skin tighten. She told herself this was inevitable. The world commodifies what it doesn't know how to nurture. Truth was no exception. Still, she couldn't shake the irony. The same system that once silenced her now wanted to sponsor her voice. A month later, a PR consultant she barely knew called her, voice bright and urgent. Aya, you're trending. Trending, she repeated, as if the word were a foreign currency. Someone took a clip from your summit talk, the part where you said, fear's an honest teacher. It's everywhere. Half the leadership coaches on TikTok are quoting it. You're a movement now. A movement. Another word she didn't trust. She opened her phone and saw it, her face frozen mid-sentence, overlaid with captions and hashtags. Hashtag Aya Rahman, hashtag leadership truths, hashtag fear is an honest teacher. There were sound bites, remixes, stitched reactions, think pieces. Some people cried on camera, thanking her for saving their careers. Others argued about whether she was too corporate to be revolutionary. A few accused her of selling idealism. She scrolled until her eyes blurred. Then she threw the phone onto the couch and whispered, I didn't build this. By Friday, her publisher called. We should lean into this, they said. The moment's hot. Maybe a second edition? A masterclass? People are craving your voice. My voice isn't content, Aya said quietly. It's not about content, it's about reach. Reach is just a polite word for consumption. A pause. Then the inevitable sigh of someone trained to convert conviction into profit. Aya, we can do this ethically. She almost laughed. That's what every unethical pitch starts with. The call ended politely. The silence afterward wasn't peaceful. It buzzed. She'd written to reclaim her voice. Now her voice had become another product. Meanwhile, on the other side of the corporate ocean, Damon was watching the same spectacle from a different vantage point. He'd seen the viral clips, the commentary, the debates. He saw his company mentioned in articles again, sometimes named, sometimes disguised behind a leading firm. He didn't mind the criticism anymore. What unsettled him was how shallow the conversations had become. They called Aya a disruptor, a whistleblower, a visionary. Few called her what she really was, a mirror. In a meeting with senior executives, someone suggested partnering with Aya's brand. Damon stopped them mid-sentence. She's not a brand, he said evenly. She's a conscience. There's a difference. The room went quiet. No one argued. He took that as progress, small fragile progress. After the meeting, he sent her a message. If they come for your name, remember, you already own your silence. Don't let them rent it. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. 2 weeks later, Aya met with Alexis Reed for coffee. It had been months since the summit, but the bond between them had evolved from professional respect into quiet friendship. Two women who knew too much about power and too little about rest. Alexis leaned back, sipping her espresso. You're everywhere lately. Aya rolled her eyes. Don't remind me. They're quoting you in government briefings now. Then God help the government. Alexis smiled. You sound tired. I am, Aya admitted. Not of speaking, of being interpreted. That's the cost of being heard, Alexis said. Everyone wants a version they can survive. Aya looked out the window. Rain traced lines down the glass. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. No, Alexis said firm. You just have to remember why you started. You didn't speak to be famous. You spoke to be free. Fame just showed up uninvited. Aya nodded slowly. Then maybe I need to remind people what freedom actually sounds like. Meaning. Aya smiled faintly. Meaning I'm going to write again. But this time no metaphors. Just the truth. Plain and unmarketable. That night, Aya opened a new document. Title: The Cost of Being Heard. She stared at the blinking cursor and whispered, let's see if they can sell this too. She began. Everyone says they want truth until it stops flattering them. They say they want vulnerability until it refuses to perform. And they say they want leadership until it costs them power. She wrote for hours, not about her story but about what happens to people who tell theirs. About how exposure eats privacy. How audiences mistake honesty for entertainment. How even healing becomes a trend. She wrote until her eyes burned, until her fingers cramped, until the page felt raw enough to breathe again. When she finished, it wasn't a book. It was a warning. A week later, she sent it to her publisher with a note. You can print this, but you can't market it. If you try, I'll leak it for free. The publisher hesitated, then agreed. When The Cost of Being Heard came out, it didn't go viral. It didn't trend. But the people who read it didn't forget it. One reviewer wrote, if the weight of air taught us how to speak, this one teaches us how to protect what speaking costs. Aya smiled when she read that line. That was all she wanted. Months passed. The noise faded. Her quotes became less trendy, her face less visible, her name less searchable. She liked it that way. Now, when someone reached out, it was usually someone who'd read, not just heard. The difference was everything. She started holding small, private circles, 8 people at a time, sitting in living rooms or community centers talking about boundaries, burnout, belonging. No press, no cameras, no takeaways. Just conversation. One evening, after one of these circles, a young man lingered behind. I read both your books, he said. The first made me quit. The second made me stay, but differently. Aya smiled. Then they worked. He hesitated, then asked, do you ever wish you hadn't written them? I thought for a long time. Sometimes, she said. But regret's just clarity showing up late. And clarity's always welcome. He nodded and left. She stayed behind, cleaning up coffee cups, turning off lights. The room smelled like honesty, that faint mix of sweat, nerves, and relief. She sat for a while in the half-dark, the hum of the city like a faraway ocean. And for the first time since the letter, she felt something close to balance. Not peace exactly, peace was too static, but equilibrium. The world would twist her words, bend them, market them, forget them. But the people who needed them would find them. That was enough. Across the city, Damon sat in his office late again. Not as a habit, but as reflection. He'd been promoted again, though he barely mentioned it anymore. Titles felt like stickers on glass, easy to peel off. On his desk sat both her books, dog-eared, annotated. He used them to train new managers. Some rolled their eyes. Some took notes. Most learned. He often caught himself quoting her without realizing it. And when people asked if he'd ever met her, he'd say, once. And that was enough to know better. He no longer saw her as the woman who left. He saw her as the reason he stayed. One night, long after the lights went out, he found the original letter again. The one she left on his chair years ago. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but the words still hit clean. He read the last line aloud, voice barely above a whisper. If you correct the incentives, the outcomes will correct themselves. If you don't, you will keep hiring people like me and teaching them to leave. He closed his eyes and said quietly, we stopped teaching them to leave. Outside his window, the city pulsed loud, flawed, alive. He smiled and whispered to the air, she was right again. The next morning, a package arrived at Aya's door. Inside, a single notebook. Cover blank. First page filled with Damon's handwriting. I finally understand what leadership is. It's holding a mirror long enough for others to see themselves, even when you don't like the reflection. No signature. No name. Just those words. She closed the notebook and placed it beside her window, where the morning light hit first. For a moment she thought of writing back. Then she didn't. Some conversations don't need to continue, they just need to complete. She looked out at the skyline. The same glass towers that once caged her now glittered like punctuation marks in a story that wasn't over but finally made sense. The city kept moving. Emails kept pinging. People kept talking about her words, her letter, her name. But inside her apartment there was only quiet, the kind that used to feel empty but now felt earned. She smiled, picked up her chipped mug and whispered, "Being heard isn't free. But silence costs more." And somewhere, in offices, cafes, boardrooms, classrooms, her echo stayed. Not as a sound, but as a standard. Autumn found her before she noticed. The trees outside her apartment burned gold without burning out, the kind of quiet blaze she wanted her life to resemble. Heat without hurry. She had learned to measure success differently now. Not in sales, not in views, not in noise. Her new metric was gentleness. How softly she could walk through a room and still leave it brighter. Each morning she carried her notebook to the cafe on the corner. Same chipped mug of coffee, same stool by the window. Some mornings she wrote letters she never sent. Other mornings she edited the mentorship program she'd started for women in transition. It was small, 50 minutes, 10 mentors, but it worked. They called it the warm table. The rule was simple. No one sat higher than anyone else. At first, companies had laughed at the format. Too emotional, they said. No measurable ROI. 6 months later they were copying it. I didn't mind. She hadn't trademarked kindness. Meanwhile, across the city, Luminex Global was learning to keep its promises. Damon had turned the reforms into habits: transparent credit logs, open calendars, mentorship tracked alongside revenue. The numbers had steadied. The people had stayed. But power never goes quietly. The board had changed 2 new faces with new ambitions. Among them was Chloe Lynn, a 33-year-old strategist who had risen fast and smooth, the way people do when they haven't yet learned to fall. She admired Damon, at least at first. Then she began to question him. "Why do we still talk about that letter?" she asked during a leadership offsite. "Because it keeps us honest," Damon said. She smiled, polite but sharp. "Or because it keeps you humble." He said nothing. Chloe wasn't cruel, she was impatient. To her, the culture Aya built looked like caution. She wanted speed, innovation, disruption. The board liked her words. Investors liked her graphs. Within months she was promoted to Chief Strategy Officer, the role Damon once dreamed of and no longer desired. When he congratulated her, she said, "Don't worry, I'll keep the mirrors polished." He smiled, the kind that hides an ache. "Just remember what they're for." Aya first heard about Chloe from Alexis. "Your old company's golden child," Alexis said over tea. "Brilliant but loud. Thinks empathy slows execution." Aya laughed softly. "Then she's about to learn what speed without listening buys you." "Do you ever miss it?" Alexis asked. "Sometimes," Aya admitted. "But missing isn't wanting back. It's just remembering the language of a place you don't live in anymore." Winter crept in. The mentorship program expanded. Word of mouth. No advertising. Traveling Chicago, Denver, Toronto. Rooms full of people who looked exhausted but curious. She taught them small things. How to say no without apology, how to ask for credit without trembling, how to leave with grace when staying meant shrinking. Every city left her both fuller and emptier, the paradox of giving pieces that don't grow back but make space for new ones. One night in Toronto, after a session, she returned to her hotel room to find a bouquet of lilies at her door. No card. Just a note folded between the stems. "They're testing the fire again. Thought you'd want to know." No signature, but she knew the handwriting. Damon. Back in the city, the test had begun. Chloe had proposed streamlining the mentorship initiatives. "Too much time, not enough profit. Culture is important," she said in the meeting. "But culture doesn't pay dividends." Damon looked around the table at executives who wanted to agree but feared appearing heartless. "Culture is the dividend," he said. "Profit just cashes it." The room murmured. Chloe pressed on. "We can preserve the spirit. Just modernize the structure." He recognized the phrasing, it was how he used to justify harm. That night he stayed late again. The floor was empty except for the reflection in the glass, older now but clearer. He opened his drawer and pulled out Aya's first book. He reread the line he had once underlined, "If you build something you can't leave, it's not a legacy, it's a cage." He realized Luminex was still learning how to build doors. The next morning he called Chloe into his office. "I know what you're trying to do," he said gently. But cutting mentorship isn't efficiency, it's amnesia. She frowned. We're not a therapy center, Damon. No, he said. We're a memory center. We remember how not to become what broke us. She smirked. You talk like she's still here. She is, he said simply. In every policy that stopped being optional. Weeks later, Aya received another message. Subject: Your table saved my job. It was from a woman in Luminex's finance team. She described how the mentorship circle Damon reinstated had prevented her resignation, how Chloe had attended one session just to observe and had left silent and thoughtful. Aya smiled. Fire, she murmured. Still warm, spring. Chloe invited Damon to a one-on-one lunch. She arrived late, ordered fast, spoke faster. Then out of nowhere she said, I read her books. He looked up. She was right, Chloe said quietly. Fear's an honest teacher. She stirred her coffee. It scared me how right she was. He said nothing. Sometimes silence is applause. She built something real, Chloe continued. I almost broke it because I thought progress meant forgetting. Doesn't. It means remembering faster. He exhaled. A breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for months. Then you'll be fine, he said. Meanwhile, Aya had taken to teaching a quarterly retreat in a cabin 2 hours north. No Wi-Fi, no slides, just people and questions. She called it the slow fire. The rule: you can speak only after 5 minutes of silence. On the last night of the retreat, sitting by the fire, someone asked, How do you keep your flame from burning you? Aya smiled. You stop confusing heat for purpose. Fire isn't proof you're alive. Warmth is. The group fell quiet, staring into the flames. Outside, snow began to fall like forgiveness. Months later, she received an invitation to a corporate conference, keynote slot, high pay, televised. She almost deleted it until she saw the footer, sponsored by Luminex Global. She laughed out loud. Then after a moment she typed her reply. I'll speak, but only if the stage is shared, employees, not executives. 2 days later Damon wrote back, deal. The conference gleaming, intimidating. Cameras, lights, banners. Aya almost turned around in the lobby, but then she saw the crowd. Not suits, not investors, but the staff. The people who once stayed invisible. The session opened without fanfare. Damon introduced her briefly and then stepped aside. No slideshow, no statistics. Just Aya, the microphone, and the weight of everything that had changed. I used to think stories like mine ended with closure, she said. They don't. They just changed narrators. She looked at the faces in front of her, some nervous, some proud, all listening. You don't need a letter to tell the truth, she continued. You need a place where truth doesn't cost your belonging. Applause didn't erupt. It grew slowly, sincerely, like warmth spreading. In the front row, Chloe nodded. At the back, Damon clapped once, then twice, then stopped because some moments don't need noise. After the event, Aya found him by the exit. He looked older, lighter. You did it, she said. He shook his head. We did it. Eventually. She smiled. Keep it burning. He gestured to the staff filing out. They will. I just guard the embers. She reached out, touched his arm, a brief human acknowledgement. Then I guess my work here is done. He met her eyes. Maybe your work just changed shape. She considered that. Maybe. They parted without promises. Some connections don't need future tense. That night, back home, Aya lit a single candle on her table. She watched the flame tremble, then steady. It didn't roar. It didn't reach. It just stayed warm. She opened her notebook and wrote, Change isn't a revolution. It's a relay. You hand the fire forward and trust they won't mistake it for light alone. She closed the notebook, turned off the lights, and sat in the glow. Outside, the city shimmered with its usual noise, but for the first time, it sounded like music she knew. The warmth held. And the story, hers, theirs, kept burning the right way. Time didn't pass the way it used to. It didn't sprint. It unfolded. Like a tide that knew exactly where to stop. 3 years had passed since the conference. The last time Aya and Damon shared a stage. The last time her story needed an audience. The world had kept moving as it always does, but some currents had changed direction. The Luminex reforms had spread far beyond the company. Universities studied them, case studies cited them, and leadership summits borrowed them shamelessly. In most places her name no longer appeared, just the Rahman principle, an ironic immortality she hadn't asked for. She no longer lived in the city. She'd moved north to a small lakeside town where the loudest sound was wind brushing pine. She still wrote, shorter now, slower. Some mornings she'd walk by the water and dictate thoughts into her phone, her voice softer than before. "Influence is best measured by what keeps working when you leave," she said once into the recorder. Then she laughed to herself. "And what keeps working when your name is forgotten?" The laugh was different these days, lighter, unburdened by proof. She had kept the warm table alive, though she no longer ran it. The mentorship network had grown roots of its own, local chapters, volunteers, even a modest foundation. Priya now led it full-time. They still talked every month, voice notes mostly, not meetings. Aya preferred words that expired after being heard. "Guess what?" Priya's message said one morning. "We're in 15 countries now. Someone in Kenya started a chapter. They call it Meza Moto. That means the warm table in Swahili." Aya listened, smiling at the audio's static edges. "You built something real," she whispered, then saved the message. Later, she looked at the map on her wall, pins scattered across continents, connected by faint lines of ink. She didn't draw them all at once, she added them over time, whenever someone sent news of another chapter. The lines looked like constellations, the kind you can't see unless you turn off the city lights. Damon had turned 50 that spring. He didn't throw a party. He didn't post. He spent the evening walking through the nearly empty office, pausing at desks where small sticky notes still carried traces of culture. "A thank you here, a good work there." The building was quieter now, not hollow but human. The laughter no longer felt forced. The air didn't hum with fear. On his desk sat a photo, a team picture from a recent off-site. In the middle stood Chloe, now CEO, flanked by news he didn't recognize. He liked that. Change should always look unfamiliar. When the board had voted her in, Chloe had called him first. "I'm ready," she'd said. "You are," he replied. He meant it. He'd stayed on as advisor, one step back, two steps prouder. That night, after everyone left, he found himself staring at Aya's first letter again. He still kept it, framed but not displayed, private accountability. He read the same line he always did, "Correct the incentives." He smiled and muttered, "Still trying." Then he locked the office and went home. Meanwhile, Aya's life had become smaller by choice. She taught occasionally, guest lectures at universities, one-off workshops for nonprofits. She didn't brand them. She didn't promote them. If someone wanted to find her, they had to look beyond the spotlight. Students came for the resume, stayed for the silence. She would begin every session the same way. "You don't need to hear my story. You need to hear your own." She'd pause. Let the words find gravity. Then she'd add, "But if you're asking how to make it out alive, write everything down." That always made them lean forward. One day after class, a young woman named Isha approached her. "I work at a startup," she said. "We're growing fast, but it's messy. People leave crying and leadership keeps saying it's normal. I don't think it should be." I studied her. The trembling voice. The clenched hands. The exhaustion disguised as ambition. She saw herself at 28. "What are you going to do about it?" I asked. "I don't know. I'm scared." "Good," Aya said. "That means you still have a conscience. Don't let the fear get quiet. That's how it kills you." Isha blinked. "You sound like that author, Aya Rahman. Have you read her?" Aya smiled. "Once or twice." Isha grinned. "She's the reason I haven't quit yet." "Maybe she'll be the reason you don't stay too long either," Aya said. Back home, Aya sat by the window thinking about that conversation. The fire she'd started had moved beyond her sightline, and that was the point. She was no longer the story's center. She was the soil it grew from. Her notebook was half empty now, pages of reflections, fragments, questions she no longer needed to answer. On the last page she'd written, "Legacy isn't the echo of your voice. It's the behavior your silence teaches." She liked how it sounded, unfinished, like truth should be. That winter, she received a call from Alexis. "You won't believe this," Alexis said. "Chloe Lynn just gave a keynote. Guess what she titled it?" "What?" I asked. "The Warm Table." I laughed. She finally understood. "She quoted you without naming you," Alexis added. Just said, someone once taught me that leadership is borrowed, not owned. Good, Aya said. Then it worked. Alexis paused. You okay with that? Being erased. Aya smiled softly. I prefer to call it integration. In early spring, Aya was invited to an award ceremony, the Global Ethics Forum. They wanted to honor her contributions to workplace humanity. You don't have to speak. Just show up. Some of us need to see you in the same room as your echo. Aya agreed. The night of the ceremony, she wore a simple black dress and no makeup. She sat in the back. The speeches were long, the compliments extravagant. When they called her name, the applause lasted too long. She walked to the stage slowly. The host handed her the trophy, a glass globe engraved with her name. She looked at it, then at the audience and said simply, I'm grateful. But remember, awards don't fix systems. People do. So, if this ever becomes an excuse to stop trying, throw it away. The room went silent, then rose to its feet. She smiled, nodded, and walked off stage before the applause ended. Later in the hallway, Damon found her. He'd come quietly, unnoticed. You still hate ceremonies, he said. Only when they mistake applause for impact. He smiled. Still you. Still learning, she said. They stood for a moment in comfortable silence, the kind that holds gratitude without needing words. Then she said, I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you left, he replied. They both laughed. A year later, Aya turned 50. She celebrated alone, not out of loneliness but choice. She spent the day walking by the lake, then cooking dinner, then writing one last letter. It wasn't to anyone in particular, it was to the next person who would need it. You will think you're the only one who sees the cracks. You're not. You will think silence is safer. It isn't. You will think your letter won't change anything. It will, not because it's loud but because it's true. She folded it, placed it in an envelope, and left it in a library book. The weight of air, her own copy, worn from time. She didn't sign it. Weeks later, a student would find it, read it, and start a new story. Back in the city, Damon sat in a cafe, same one, quiet place. He was mentoring a young leader who complained, this culture stuff takes too long. Damon smiled, stirred his coffee, and said, so does trust. That's why it lasts. The young man frowned. Who taught you that? He looked out the window at the city skyline. Someone who left the right way. Years passed quietly. The world changed as it does, new buzzwords, new crises, new slogans about empathy. But underneath the noise, something stayed steady. People asked better questions. Companies apologized faster. Leaders listened longer. Every change traces back to something unseen, a memo, a moment, a mirror. Aya's mirror had become many. One evening, as the sun slipped beneath the lake, she watched the reflection ripple, no longer perfect but alive. She thought about her letter, her books, her people. She thought about the laughter that once belittled her and how silence had outlived it. The world would keep rewriting her story, but the truth would always start in the same place. A desk, a woman, a letter, and the courage to stop pretending. She whispered to herself, that's enough. The kettle clicked off. The lake darkened. And somewhere in another office, another woman began typing her own version of the same letter, unaware that she wasn't starting something new, only continuing something sacred. The fire stayed warm. The air stayed clean. And the legacy, quiet, invisible, unstoppable, stayed alive. The last time she walked the old route, the city had softened at the edges. Buildings she once treated like judges now looked like ordinary furniture in a room that finally belonged to her. She didn't come for nostalgia. She came to see if the light that started here still worked without her hand on the switch. 3 blocks from the tower, a crowd leaned around a storefront window. Inside, a community bookshop hosted a circle of chairs. Not enough for everyone who wanted to listen. The flyer on the door read, whose work are we building on? Aya smiled. No logo. No sponsors. Just a question that had survived the years and taken root where it mattered most. Inside ordinary rooms. She didn't stay. She didn't need to. Some nights, legacy is better as a rumor. Across town, Luminex prepared for a transition that didn't come with champagne. Damon was leaving his advisory seat. No scandal, no push. He was done, not finished. He'd scheduled his goodbye at 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, low drama, high likelihood of coffee. The night before, he walked the empty floor the way people walk old neighborhoods. He paused where the old culture used to live, in the shadows of polished glass and performance. It wasn't there anymore. The light had settled deeper into practices, handoffs, habits. He turned off the last desk lamp and whispered, "Keep the verbs honest." The next morning, Chloe introduced him with gentleness rather than theater. "A man who once believed speed was the point," she said, "and learned that people are the road." A smattering of laughter, then something better, quiet. He kept his remarks short. "I'm not a better person because I changed. I'm a safer leader because I stopped letting defensiveness make decisions." Someone in the back clapped once, appreciative rather than impressed. Appropriate. After, he found a small envelope on his chair. No signature, just 2 handwritten lines. "We didn't stay because you got nicer. We stayed because the room got kinder." He put it in his pocket without the old reflex to take credit for what wasn't his. Across an ocean, in a Nairobi co-working loft, Mizumoto held its 100th circle. A teacher, a nurse, a civil servant, a software engineer, and a man who had never been mentored by anyone but poverty, sat knee to knee and spoke in the ordinary language of people who have stopped auditioning for worth. They started with 5 minutes of silence, as the program demanded, then told the truth without confessions theatrics. At the end, the facilitator read a sentence taped to the wall, "When credit circulates, oxygen does too." No one knew the author personally. Everyone knew the author intimately. In a Midwestern university, Isha, now a program director, led a class called Work That Doesn't Shrink You. Students wanted tactics. She gave them muscles. Write everything down. Measure what matters. Don't confuse flattery with safety, she said, then added a postscript borrowed from the woman who once told her not to let the fear get quiet. The syllabus listed no required texts. On the suggested list, the weight of air and the cost of being heard. The footnote simply read, "Read for repair, not for quotes." In a downtown auditorium, a new executive announced a sweeping reorg to justify the ego of urgency. He punctuated slides with buzzwords and listed sacrifices as if they were virtues. Midway through, a young analyst raised her hand and asked the question that doesn't belong to anyone anymore. "Whose work is this built on?" The room stuttered, then stilled, then shifted. The executive swallowed, then said, "We'll add the names. And the promotions." The analyst nodded, not satisfied, just confirmed. The question kept the light on long enough for fairness to find the door. In a kitchen that had outlived 3 tenants and 4 generations of burnt coffee, Priya scribbled on a whiteboard between 2 loaded dish racks. Global chapters. New mentors. Exit ramps for burnout that didn't look like failure. She left the last box unchecked on purpose. Annual retreat for organizers. Rest as a deliverable. When her daughter wandered in, sleepy and curious, Priya lifted the marker like a wand. "This is the most powerful thing we make here," she said. "Not plans. Boundaries." At a different kitchen table, Aya opened a letter addressed simply to Aya Rahman. No street, no city, just faith and a cooperating postal clerk. Inside, a photocopy of a resignation letter with margin notes from a stranger. "I was going to quit like a ghost. Then I wrote it like a mirror." Another line on the back, "They didn't fire him. They fixed the incentives." Aya folded it, slid it into a folder she kept labeled "Outcomes I Won't Post," and sat very still with the kind of satisfaction you don't perform, the kind that arrives as relief, not victory. The lake outside her window kept its winter promise, hard and bright. She traded skylines for waterlines and never regretted it. The town knew her as the woman who walked early and spoke softly. Teenagers in hoodies nodded at her like they were in on the secret. Baristas memorized her order and refused her money too often. She let them win sometimes. On her desk sat a stack of envelopes she hadn't opened. Not fan mail, she'd stopped allowing that, but invitations to speak at places that had once treated values as decor. A hedge fund, a pro sports franchise, a national broadcaster. The irony tasted better now. She sorted the stack into 3 piles. Yes, no, not yet, using a rule she never wrote down. Only go where the room will do the work when you leave. She could feel the book inside her that she might never write. Not a how-to. Not a memoir. A small collection of letters addressed to the version of herself that once needed someone else's permission to matter. She started one, no pressure, no deadline, just a steady hand. "Dear person who thinks they're overreacting. You're not. Your nervous system is telling the truth your mouth is afraid to live in. Here are 3 things to measure before you apologize for noticing: who gets named, who gets blamed, who gets burned. If your answers form a pattern, draw a door. Then walk through it. The hallway on the other side is called dignity. It's narrow at first. It widens with every step. She closed the notebook and watched a small boat draw a neat line across the lake. The wake collapsed behind it. Movement doesn't always need to leave evidence. The call came on a Sunday, the way necessary things sometimes do. Unannounced, untheatrical. Damon's name lit her phone. She answered on the second ring. "Hi," he said. The voice of a man who had practiced changing and kept practicing after the audience went home. "Hi. I wanted you to know I'm done." A laugh, self-aware and unashamed. "I mean, with that building." "I heard," she said. She hadn't. It didn't matter. "I didn't want an article to tell you first." "Thank you." Silence, clean, easy. He broke it gently. "I keep thinking about the first line of your letter. Not the one everyone quotes. The first one. I am leaving." "It was the hardest one to write," she said. "It's the only one I still rehearse," he said. "To make sure when I say it the next time, it still means movement, not escape." She didn't congratulate him. He didn't ask for it. He said, "Take care," like a promise to himself, and ended the call. She placed the phone face down, then face up, then off. The room brightened by a degree that had nothing to do with bulbs or sun. Some closures don't echo, they settle. Spring laid out its ordinary miracles. The warm table hosted a gathering near Aya's town. No microphones, no banners. Priya insisted she come and sit in the circle like everyone else. She did, and when it was her turn, she passed without speaking. Not because she had nothing to say, because the silence had finally learned to stand on its own. Halfway through, a young woman with steady eyes and a scarf like a flag around her neck told a story about a letter she'd written to a boss who confused emergency with importance. "He didn't apologize," the woman said, "but the policy did." The circle laughed, not at the man but at the muscle they had grown together. Aya laughed too, a sound that felt like a hand on the present. After the session, the woman approached her. "People tell me I sound like your books," she said. It wasn't a question. Aya shook her head. "You sound like yourself without the parts they removed." The woman nodded, relieved for a correction that gave rather than took. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with both hands. On her walk home, Aya cut through the long path by the marsh where geese practiced aggressive democracy. She thought of all the rooms she'd left and all the rooms that had learned to continue without her. That used to feel like loss, now it felt like design. She reached her porch as a courier pulled up with a small package. Inside, a photo in a simple frame. No note. The image was a conference slide that read, "Who built this? Name them now." 6 names followed. None were executives. Beneath, a caption in someone else's handwriting. "Standard practice." She set the frame on a shelf next to a smooth stone from a summer she wanted to keep and a dried flower from a celebration she didn't need to recall to still be warmed by. She brewed tea. She sat. She didn't touch her phone. She listened to the house be a house, wood answering wind, pipes remembering water, the low conversation of heat and space negotiating comfort. Then she opened the drawer labeled for after and pulled out the last thing she had written the night before she resigned. The first letter before the letter. She had forgotten about it. The paper had the brittleness of artifacts that surprise themselves by surviving. "Damon, I will probably write you something better than this. More useful. Calmer. Truer. If this is the only one that exists, it says what the polished version will hide. I'm tired of loving this place more than it loves its people. I'm tired of translating excellence into invisibility to spare your comfort. I'm tired of pretending to be grateful for rooms that eat me. You are not the point. I am not the point. What we make together is the point, and it will outlast both of us if we stop starving it for credit. If you never see this, then I've learned how to be kinder than this letter is. If you do, it's because you needed the unvarnished version to believe the gentle one. She folded it back into the envelope and placed it under the weight of air. The way people tuck old photos into cookbooks so memory can season the next meal without having to be tasted directly. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. When the mail came the next morning, an unmarked envelope fell through the slot. Inside, a single line typed on plain paper, We hired her to replace me. No signature. Just a forward address of a small consultancy in another city. Aya smiled. Somewhere, a man had stepped aside before gravity did it for him. Somewhere, a woman would walk into a room that expected her to lead, and gave her the tools rather than the warning label. That was a different kind of miracle, the boring kind, the only kind that lasts. On a weekday afternoon that felt like a Sunday, she wandered into the town library and saw a copy of The Cost of Being Heard by the Returns Bean. A folded scrap stuck out like a tongue. She opened it. Her own handwriting, the letter she'd left months ago for no one in particular. Dear person who thinks they're overreacting. Someone had underlined draw a door and written below it, found mine. Another hand had added an arrow and the word same. The marginalia of a movement that had learned to talk to itself without a shepherd. She put the book back and walked out into air that had the audacity to be free. That evening, as the light lowered itself kindly over the water, Aya sat on the stoop and wrote the last piece she owed this story. Owed, not to publishers or panels or even to the past, but to the future that would wake up one morning and need a sentence to keep from shrinking. To whoever needs this next. I didn't leave to hurt anyone. I left to stop hurting myself. The letter was not a weapon. It was a measuring tape I used on a room that had lost track of its own size. We stretched the walls. Some people stayed and learned to breathe. Some left and learned to live. Both were successes. If you write your version, write it clean. Use receipts, not rage. Name patterns, not monsters. Offer maps. Then go. Or stay. But decide on purpose. If they laugh, remember, laughter is just fear wearing perfume. When it fades, the work remains. Let that be your comfort. Not their apologies, not your vindication. The quiet sturdiness of what keeps working after the noise forgets itself. Bring a warm table with you. Teach others how to build their own. Light stays when hands keep it. She dated it. She didn't send it. She didn't have to. The story knew where to find people now. The first star arrived early, bold as if auditioning. She finished her tea and blew out the small candle on the step, not because the dark was frightening, but because the light had already learned where to live. The phone buzzed once on the table inside. Priya sending a photo of a circle in a new city. Damon forwarding a policy revision with the subject line no fanfare. Chloe's team announcing a scholarship named not after Aya but after the warm table. She let the phone be a phone. Tonight, legacy could leave a message. A breeze crossed the lake and found its way to her face with the accuracy of old friendship. She closed her eyes and let it make her a promise she trusted. The work would outlast the workers. The rooms would remember how to listen. The letters would get easier to write, not because harm would stop, but because courage would become customary. The light remained. Not as a spotlight but as a standard, held by many, named by none, stubborn as kindness, ordinary as breath. When she finally went inside, she left the door ajar. Not out of carelessness. Out of continuity. Some lights are communal by design. And somewhere, under a borrowed lamp table that used to feel like a courtroom, another person began writing. I am leaving. Not as surrender. In the end, it wasn't the letter that changed everything. It was the silence that came after. The kind that no longer begged to be believed. Buildings kept rising. Names kept changing. But somewhere between the boardrooms and the break rooms, her words stayed folded inside people's pockets like proof that truth can survive translation. She never needed a monument. Just a world where no one else would have to write the same letter again. And every morning when the light touched the lake, it said what the letter had always meant to say. You can walk away and still leave the world brighter behind you.